a find that provoked a confrontation between republics. Courage that laid the foundation for one of the best museums in the CIS. An exhibit that drew the attention of the whole world. Museum of Historical Treasures of Ukraine. Today, this is one of the best museums in former territories of the Soviet Union. Before this, it was a kind of long-term project. The idea and prerequisites for its appearance arose back in the mid-1950s, but the first official document appeared only 9 years later. It took more than 5 years on top of that before it opened its doors to visitors. There are so many exhibits and stunning stories connected to them, collected inside, that they continue to amaze visitors even after 50 years of the museum's existence. Like, for example, the finds from the Melitopol Barrow, which was explored in the summer of 1954. These were the very studies that laid the foundations of the current museum. It all started with the discovery of a real masterpiece of Greco-Scythian toreutics, the golden lining for Scythian gorytos. But almost immediately after acquiring this and other artifacts, Ukraine risks losing them forever. Even during the times of the Russian Empire, there was such an attitude that all the precious things found during excavations, all archaeological finds that deserve special attention, Scythian for example, or from even earlier periods, were to be taken to the Hermitage. The Hermitage had a special storage, and they were taken there. It was, well, generally accepted, as one archaeologist wrote, a generally accepted tradition.
Це було, як то кажуть, общеприйняте, як писав один археолог, общеприйняте традиція.
The Scythian artifacts that were removed at different times under various pretexts and from different places of Ukraine are now used by Russia to exalt its statehood, its history. Much of it is fictitious, stolen from other peoples, in particular from Ukrainians, and recent events are a prime example of this. In the autumn of 2017, a large-scale exhibition was organized at the British Museum in London, organized by it in unison with the Russian Hermitage. Its name was quite eloquent: Scythian Warriors of Ancient Siberia. The very name of this exhibition was intended to demonstrate the belonging of Scythian archaeological complex to Imperial Russia. Although a number of items presented there were directly related to Ukraine, particularly to Crimea. But as we know, the current government of the Russian Federation is trying to appropriate part of Ukrainian sacred heritage in every possible way. And first of all, this relates to the Scythian archaeological complex, which is systematically used by the Russian scientific elite, and for which we have full historical and moral rights. Nowhere was it indicated at the exhibition that many of the exhibited artifacts were found on Ukrainian territory, not only in the Crimean Peninsula currently occupied by Russia, but also in its continental part. In particular, from one of the richest Scythian royal burials dating back to 4th century BC, Soloha Barrow, excavated in Zaporizhia region in 1912 to 1913. But Moscow didn't limit itself to the removal of Scythian artifacts. Material valuables, or rather spiritual valuables, that were located on the territory of Ukraine starting, let's say, from the 18th century, were transported systematically, purposefully, gradually, in huge quantities, and ended up in the museums of Russia. In that same Hermitage, in the Tretyakov Gallery, the Kremlin Armory, the State Historical Museum, and other institutions of Russia, in both St. Petersburg and Moscow and other cities.
І в Петербурзі, і в Москві, і в інших містах. Тобто, це фактично...
This is in fact our historical memory. These are our historical relics, old Rus from the times of the Hetmanate and from later times. All our valuables, relics that were in museums, libraries, churches were found during archaeological excavations. All of them were taken in significant quantities, transported to Moscow and St. Petersburg. And then they stayed there, sometimes temporarily, sometimes for 3 months, for example.
До Петербурга і осідали, іноді тимчасово, іноді на 3 місяці, наприклад.
This also happened to the unique 12th century mosaic depicting Saint Demetrius of Thessaloniki. In 1935, the Bolsheviks who occupied Ukraine at the time blew up a unique church, the Cathedral of the Archangel Michael, known to the people of Kiev as Saint Michael the Golden Domed. While preparing the explosion, Russian mosaic artist Professor Vladimir Frolov transferred several mosaics from the cathedral to a cement base in a cast iron frame. They were then transferred to the Kiev Museum of Russian Art. Today it's called the National Museum Kiev Art Gallery. But in 1938, the mosaic with Demetrius of Thessaloniki was brought to Moscow. They said it would be temporary, for an exhibition at the Tretyakov Gallery.
На 3 місяці. Там вона і залишилась.
For 3 months, and it has stayed there since. And there are others, a huge number of historical monuments that reflect the historical memory, historical tradition, and in fact our national values, national treasures of the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian nation, the Ukrainian state. And they're on the territory of a foreign state. During the National Liberation War of 1917 to 1921, and after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the Ukrainian authorities made attempts to return national treasures to Ukraine from Russia.
Власне, так як і це робилося.
Actually, the same thing happened to historical artifacts that were transported to Germany and the West during World War II.
Світової війни в Німеччину і
So, starting from the year 2000, Western states, the United States, Canada, Germany, as mentioned before Italy, were gradually returning certain treasures to Ukraine in line with international law. This issue has not yet reached its conclusion. Naturally, much more remains outside. But there is one fact: it exists. These treasures are being returned. In the meantime, while Russia absolutely categorically refuses to fulfill any international obligations and essentially leaves these treasures on its territory, ignoring the reports, appeals and demands made by the Ukrainian authorities.
Ігноруючи заяви, звернення і вимоги української влади.
The finds from the Melitopol Barrow could have shared the same sad fate of many Ukrainian artifacts, and everything was going in that direction. It was already accepted that it would be sent to the Hermitage. The director of the Hermitage, Mikhail Artamonov, even wrote, "According to the generally accepted tradition, we are waiting. When will you send it? After all, it was high time." But back then, Ukrainian scientists, as they say, had already decided that the time was right to create their own museum. And now we believe that the discovery of the plate became the catalyst for the creation of our museum. It was Ukrainian scholar and archaeologist Ivan Shevkoplyas who rebelled against this existing tradition. He refused Artamonov's request to transfer Ukrainian valuables. The latter then complained directly to the president of the Academy of Sciences of the Ukrainian SSR, Alexander Paladin, claiming that Shevkoplyas was violating the established tradition. This got him an absolutely unexpected response. Paladin not only protected his young colleague, but also issued an order to leave the relics in Ukraine.
Ну, от, зокрема, Іван Шевкопляс, він якби не стільки в власних спогадах.
In particular, Ivan Shevkoplyas, according not so much to his own recollections but his wife's, sounds as if he fought and corresponded with the Hermitage, and so on and so forth. But he was just an ordinary employee. I think that the very leadership of the Republic and the Academy of Sciences played a crucial part here. And we owe it to them that these finds remained in Ukraine, in Kiev, because there was a whole range of tasks that needed to be resolved to get this done. It wasn't enough to just announce that some items would be staying in Kiev in Ukraine.
Потрібно було вирішувати цілий комплекс.
Since the finds were to remain here, they had to take responsibility upon themselves to ensure that in time there would be a museum to exhibit them all, with appropriate conditions for storage, exhibition, restoration, and so on.
Це музей, де це все може бути експонуватися, і де будуть відповідні умови для зберігання, експонування, реставрації і так далі, і так далі. Чому це все вирішувалося на рівні?
What I want to say is this was all decided at the level of the Republic's leaders, because all of this requires a comprehensive approach. And then this whole story with creating a museum continued for almost 10 years, because the order to create a museum based on the example of the gold room in the Hermitage was only issued in 1963.
Зразок золотої скарбниці в Ермітажі вийшов тільки в 1963 році.
Вчені тоді справді так зробили такі, знаєте.
Back then, scientists really did perform what is called a deed. It was 1954 after all. They called us the storeroom for a long time after that. Storeroom, a special storeroom. Well, we were always offended by the word storeroom and said, we're the treasure of Ukraine, not some storeroom.
Це слово кладовая дуже ображаємося, кажемо, ми скарбниця України. Ніяка не кладовая. Ось.
The finds from the Melitopol Barrow arrived in the stores of the Museum of Historical Treasures of Ukraine only after the order from 1963. It takes 6 more years for the Museum of Historical Treasures to open its doors to visitors. The first museum exposition was formed by about 1,500 precious, unique exhibits from different eras, mainly archaeological finds, pieces from the personal collection of the famous Kiev philanthropist and collector Bogdan Ivanovich Hanenko, exhibits donated by the Kiev State Historical Museum, artifacts donated by the Institute of Archaeology of the Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, and exhibits from different 20 museums across Ukraine. The finds discovered in Melitopol occupy a worthy place in the collection of the newly created museum.
Вони їздили практично.
They went to almost every international exhibition.
Ця пластина із
This very plate, the gorytos lining, it was featured at many exhibitions and traveled across the world, from Japan and Korea to America, European countries, and so on. It has been to lots of places.
європейські країни і так далі. Тобто вона дуже багато де побувала.
Perhaps scientists will eventually manage to unravel all the secrets of this masterpiece of Greco-Scythian toreutics, and will finally learn why the Greeks presented Scythians with items depicting scenes from their own myth. In the meantime, all we can do is admire the exhibit and its incredible history.